We're seeing a lot of videos on YouTube now. Why was Full Custom Garage canceled? In fact, it wasn't canceled. I quit. I said I've had enough.
From the outside, Ian Roussel looked like he was living the dream. Behind the scenes, almost nobody knew what he was carrying. For years, millions watched him transform scrap metal into incredible custom cars. Then he disappeared, leaving fans with more questions than answers.
We did not expect to ever move. We considered getting another place to live to supplement this.
Was he pushed away, or did he choose to walk away? And what was really happening when the cameras stopped rolling? Join us as we uncover the devastating tragedy of Ian Roussel, the heat nobody put on camera. Viewers watching Full Custom Garage saw a calm, capable man solving problems with a torch and a grinder, making it look like second nature. What they didn't see was the Mojave Desert sun bearing down on that same workshop, pushing temperatures past 110 degrees for months at a time, turning a metal shop into something closer to a kiln with a doorbell. Welding steel is hard on a good day. Welding steel for hours at a time, in heat that makes the tools themselves too hot to hold comfortably, is a different kind of hard. The kind that doesn't care how good you are at your job. This kind of heat wasn't new to him, and neither was the work. Ian had been building and fixing things with his hands since before he could drive, long before any of it had cameras attached. There were afternoons when Ian would set a wrench down on the workbench and pick it back up 10 minutes later, almost too hot to hold, the metal itself storing the desert heat like a stove left on. Crew members drank water by the gallon, just standing near the cameras. Ian was the one holding a torch, going home more worn down than the day before, season after season, while the audience assumed it all came this easily to him. It wasn't only his body absorbing the damage. Building something custom means the process is unpredictable. Ideas change halfway through, and inspiration doesn't punch a clock. Episodes need pacing. Scenes get reshot for an angle nobody in the room cares about. For a man whose entire identity was built around creative freedom, that structure started to feel less like a workshop and more like a cage with really good lighting. Every retake, every scene rebuilt for pacing, sanded down something that used to feel completely his own. There is a difference between building a car and building a car while also performing the building of a car for an audience, hitting a mark, repeating a moment that didn't feel real the first time, let alone the second. Try explaining inspiration to a shooting schedule sometime. The schedule always wins, and it never once apologizes for it. Behind him, his wife Jaime, a nurse by training, was holding together the parts of the operation that never made it onto screen. She managed logistics, coordinated schedules, and helped shape how each episode's story actually came together. Meanwhile, fans were falling in love with something they assumed was effortless. They made pilgrimages out to the Mojave to see the workshop in person, treating it like a shrine for people who loved hot rods and hand-built machines. Comment sections under his episodes were full of viewers calling him the most chill guy on television. None of them had seen him set that wrench down 10 minutes ago because it was too hot to hold. That kind of wear rarely announces itself. It wasn't a single dramatic collapse or one bad headline. It was slower than that, and even less visible. By early 2020, Ian had spent nearly 10 years living inside that exact tension, doing work he loved in front of an audience that loved watching him do it, while the conditions of doing it on camera slowly wore away at the thing that made it worth doing in the first place. Something had to give. It would take years before the rest of the story caught up to that fact. How far the ride actually went. None of this started as a television story. To understand how it became one, you have to go back to the garage where it all started. Long before television ever found him, Ian Roussel was just a kid in Sunland, California, following his father around a garage that smelled like cutting oil and hot metal. Jerry wasn't famous or rich. He just loved cars the way some men love fishing, and he passed that love down to his son the only way he knew how, by handing him tools and letting him figure things out. Most kids in the neighborhood were out riding bikes or trading baseball cards. Ian was in the garage, watching Jerry work, absorbing something no classroom was ever going to teach him. He'd spend whole afternoons scraping rust off salvaged fenders with a wire brush, laying the pieces out across the concrete floor like puzzle parts nobody else could see fitting together. And school, as it turned out, never stood a chance against that garage. Ian struggled with textbooks and tests, the kind of struggle that makes a kid feel like something is wrong with him. But put a piece of scrap metal in his hands, and the struggle disappeared. He understood shapes, angles, and possibilities in a way his teachers couldn't explain to him, and he couldn't explain to them. By the time most of his classmates were filling out college applications, Ian already knew that the future wasn't his. He graduated high school in 1989 and skipped the 4 years everyone expected him to spend in a lecture hall. Instead, in 1992, barely into his 20s, he opened his own custom garage in Southern California, sidestepping the student loans his classmates would spend the next decade complaining about. Just a young man betting everything on the one thing he was actually good at, with no investor behind him and no safety net underneath. For over a decade, nobody outside of Southern California had any idea who Ian Roussel was. He worked without drawing attention to himself, took whatever jobs came through the door, and slowly built a reputation among people who cared about cars the way he did. There were no shortcuts, viral moments, or lucky breaks handed to him on a plate. Just years of unglamorous work in a garage most of the world would never see. Then, in 2003, something small happened that would end up changing everything. Someone asked Ian to put together a DVD showing off his fabrication process. It sounded like a favor more than a job, the kind of thing you agree to at a barbecue and regret by Tuesday. But that footage didn't stay in a drawer. It found its way to executives at MAVTV Motorsports Network, and suddenly, a guy who built cars for a living was being asked if he'd ever thought about doing it on camera. He probably hadn't. Most people who are good with their hands aren't thinking about lighting rigs and camera angles. Years later, Roussel described the moment simply. One favor led to another, and suddenly, a hobby DVD had become a television show. He was blunt about his relationship to the craft itself, admitting the fabrication was less a passion for cars than something closer to an addiction. But the offer was real, and after years of pilots, negotiations, and false starts that would have made most people quit, Full Custom Garage finally premiered on March 28, 2014.
Right now on Full Custom Garage, Master Metalman Ian Roussel continues the transformation of the two Falcons.
It didn't look like anything else on television, mostly because nobody bothered faking anything. There were no manufactured feuds, no countdown clocks, no personalities performing for the camera. Just a quiet, focused man turning junk into something worth driving. Viewers weren't used to that kind of stillness on a reality show, and they responded to it anyway. The series ran 8 seasons and 78 episodes, earning an 8.5 rating on IMDb, the kind of number reality television almost never sees. By the time the show hit its stride, Ian wasn't just building cars for a domestic audience anymore. Buyers overseas were purchasing his creations sight unseen, shipping them out of Long Beach to garages on the other side of the planet. A man who once worked alone in a small Southern California shop was now shaping a global reputation, one welded panel at a time. From the outside, it looked like the kind of success story people dream about. A craftsman discovered late, handed a platform, finally seen by the world. That same platform was quietly costing him something, 110-degree afternoon at a time, and it was only a matter of time before he had to decide what to do about it. Which is exactly the decision nobody saw coming. The decision nobody saw coming. By late 2023, Full Custom Garage had been running for the better part of a decade, and like most long-running shows, its future was starting to look uncertain. Networks reassess, ratings get studied, budgets get questioned in rooms the talent never sits in. It is the unspoken reality behind almost every long-running series. At some point, someone in an office decides whether the show keeps going, and it usually isn't the person whose name is on it. Most television personalities in that position hang on for dear life. They campaign for renewal. They lean harder into the platform that made them recognizable. Because walking away from a steady audience and a steady paycheck feels like walking off a cliff with no rope. Ian didn't do that. Instead, before the network could decide the show's fate for him, Ian decided it himself. He stepped away from Full Custom Garage on his own terms, choosing to leave rather than wait around to find out whether someone else would eventually make that choice for him. Somewhere in that stretch of 2023, Ian sat down and recorded the announcement himself. Nobody in the corporate office wrote his words for him this time. He explained to a lens he controlled that he was done, filmed in the same shop where he'd built cars for a decade. The only difference this time being that nobody yelled "cut." For a man who had spent nearly a decade building his public identity around this one show, that took a kind of nerve most people in his position never managed to find. It wasn't a decision made in a single moment either. Ian had already been laying the groundwork for a life after television without telling anyone, before he ever announced anything. He launched his own YouTube channel, Full Custom Ian, while the show was still airing, giving himself somewhere to land before he ever jumped. It was a strange kind of parachute, built in secret, tested privately, ready long before anyone in his audience knew he might need it. And the channel didn't try to imitate the network show. It went in the opposite direction entirely. Episodes ran anywhere from 18 minutes to over an hour, with none of the tight, retake-heavy structure that had worn him down for years. Instead, viewers got the real, unpolished version of the work. Mistakes left in, redesigns shown honestly. No scripted beats forcing the story into a shape it didn't want to take. Fans noticed immediately. It felt, to longtime viewers, like the first real glimpse of him in years, not a version of him edited to fit a broadcast schedule. Ian rarely reached for a word like authenticity to describe what he was doing. He just left the mistakes in and let viewers draw their own conclusion. Leaving wasn't framed as an ending, and it wasn't treated like one behind the scenes either. It was framed as a correction, not an ending, a return to how Ian actually wanted to work in the first place. But choosing to leave a hit show doesn't close a workshop. That goodbye was still coming. The building he wouldn't fight to keep. For 6 years, the Desert Workshop fans knew as the Desert Ranch had been more than a filming location. It was a modest space by television standards, reportedly around 2,600 square feet, with something in the neighborhood of 180 custom builds passing through those walls over 6 years, each one eventually landing in a private collection somewhere in the world. It was where Ian actually lived out the identity the show had built around him, the isolated craftsman in the Mojave, turning scrap metal into rolling sculpture under a sun that didn't care about ratings. Fans who made the trip out there were visiting the actual place where the actual work happened, dust and all, The kind of pilgrimage where grown adults get suspiciously emotional over a gravel parking lot. By September 2024, that chapter closed too. And it wasn't because the shop was failing. It remained respected, productive, turning out work people wanted right up until the end.
Basically, it was kind of in an attempt to get Ian out of doing full custom garage because he was really ready to quit that job.
It closed because Ian and Jaime finally admitted that productive and sustainable aren't always the same thing. Ian announced he was shutting down the Desert Ranch shop for good, ending 6 years in a location that had come to represent almost everything people associated with him. There was no dramatic send-off. He said goodbye to it, the same understated way he'd said goodbye to the show. Quietly, without an audience watching him do it. Still, there was something undeniably heavy about watching a place like that go dark. It was one thing to leave a television show behind. It is another thing entirely to shut down the physical building where a decade of your actual life happened. The same shop where countless hours of welding and grinding wore down his body long before the building itself ever showed its age. A television deal is a piece of paper. A workshop is where your hands remember things your head has stopped talking about. For a while, that empty building was the closest thing this story had to a real loss. Fans who'd made that trip out to the desert now had nowhere left to go. It is easy to imagine the kind of quiet that settles over a place like that. The gravel lot empty, the grinders and torches gone silent. Nothing left to mark what used to happen there, but a name on a gate. If the story had ended right there, it would have looked exactly like the tragedy the headlines wanted it to be. A beloved builder, hollowed out by fame, closing the doors for the last time. And that is where the story split in two directions. One of them ends in the parking lot of a locked building. The other one keeps going because Ian never actually stopped working. He just stopped needing that particular building to do it in. The ranch is gone. What's left is everything it was never the source of in the first place. Building without an audience. There are so many parts, most versions of this story skip entirely, because it doesn't come with a dramatic thumbnail. Ian never stopped building. The Desert Ranch closed. Full Custom Garage ended. But the hands that spent 3 decades shaping metal didn't suddenly forget how. They just found a smaller room to keep doing it in. His YouTube channel, Full Custom Ian, kept running the entire time, completely unaffected by the shop's closure, still showing the same hands doing the same kind of work, just without a network schedule dictating how it had to look, or a producer deciding which mistakes were allowed to stay in the final cut. Today, Ian isn't chasing the fame Full Custom Garage gave him. He is not trying to rebuild a television empire or recreate what MAVTV built around him back in 2014. For a while, he and Jaime stepped away from the desert altogether, trading it for the mountains, a mirror of the trade they'd made years earlier when a small garage life became a television one. But metal has a way of pulling a person back. Ian eventually set up shop again, this time across the state line in Arizona, still in the desert, just not the one everybody already had a name for. He is building, on his own channel, at his own pace, for an audience that found him again specifically because none of it was scripted. His work continues to ship out to buyers overseas. He is also showing up where builders show up. He brought a product of his own, a lift stand he'd designed and built, to SEMA in Las Vegas. Not as a television personality promoting a show, but as a fabricator selling something he'd made with his own hands. That kind of visibility doesn't depend on ratings, renewals, or a network's permission, and nobody can cancel it. His name carries weight in a niche most people have never heard of, but that takes hot rods and hand-built cars very seriously. He didn't trade a big audience for no audience. He traded a big audience that only got the performance for a smaller one that gets the actual process, mistakes, and all. Not everyone who watched him for a decade made that trade with him. Some longtime viewers probably wonder when the show might come back, unsure if the man they used to watch every week even remembers they're out there. Whether Ian misses the scale of that old audience isn't something he's addressed directly, and it may not be a question with a clean answer. Somewhere in that low-key second act is the real answer. There was no scandal, collapse, or villain in an office somewhere. Just 10 years of heat, one retake at a time. What actually happened to Ian Roussel wasn't a fall from grace. It was closer to a narrow escape, the kind that doesn't look like much from the outside precisely because it wasn't loud. He saw the cost of staying before it finished breaking him, and he left before anyone else could make that decision for him. Which raises the one question his fans still can't agree on. Did Ian make the right call, or did he walk away too soon? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.